This is Kevin Murphy from Riff Tracks and Mystery Science Theater 3000, and you are listening to Dispatch Radio.
We have a great actor on with us. I'm a fan of a ton of the shows that he's been on. We've talked about Lost, I don't know how long, so you know how much I love that show. But he has a great show. It's called The Return. It's an A&E drama. It's about suspense, a supernatural event. We get to talk to Mark Pellegrino about it, and big fan. Mark, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. And, my wife actually was like, wow, whenever I told her I got to her, so yeah, you remember him on Being Human? You remember him on Dexter and Lost? And she just kind of rolls her eyes because of how Lost wrapped up. But she loved the role. She loved the character. And we had a good time talking to Titus about his part of it. And I'm looking forward to get a chance to catch up with you. And it's got to be good to know that, you got a Lost creator behind this show. And it sounds like a very exciting concept. Tell us more about it.
It does. It is great to have him at the helm of things because he's so creative and thinks out of the box, and I know he's going to really take the show places that the original hasn't gone, and it's going to have its own voice. I'm really looking forward to seeing where it goes. Well, but just to go back to that Lost thing real quickly before I go to The Return, did Titus explain the end to you?
Oh yeah, we mulled over all sorts of different aspects of the show and Jacob and we were good on that, I think. I mean, it got sidetracked at one point where I was just trying to pull some of his impressions out of him, but it's okay. We managed to get through.
Yeah, there probably are no answers to that, but The Returned is about this little town called Caldwell, Washington, where a miracle happens. Basically, people start returning from the dead, and my character, Jack Winship, is the father of the first girl to come back, and it's 4 years after a tragic bus accident took her life. For her, it's as if she's kind of fallen asleep and a few hours later woken up, and for us, it's 4 years after the fact, and our family is basically in tatters. I'm separated from my wife and alienated from my other daughter, her sister, and a practicing alcoholic, and our world is more or less spiraling down, and this is what our returned daughter, comes back to.
And your daughter is the first of several other characters in the town that start returning from the dead, correct? But there's like the local town is starting to see all these different people presumed dead, and your daughter just happens to be one of the first ones.
Yes, that is correct.
It sounds very, very interesting, and definitely. So let's back up yet again. How do they pitch you that on paper? Is that pretty much a synopsis like what you just gave me, or is it something a little more dynamic or less dynamic than that?
Well, since it's based on that internationally acclaimed show Le Revenant, they basically gave me a pilot episode, which I thought was fantastic, and said this is based more or less on this French show, which I kind of broke with my tradition and actually watched the entire series, which is 8 episodes basically in that first season, and I thought it was great. It's a show that's filled with kind of scary stuff and mystery and problems to solve, and there's a sci-fi element and really, really strong character-driven drama. So I love that. I mean, that's kind of the place where I like to live is in complicated characters that, really have to wend their way through some very, very, very significant issues.
We're talking to Mark Pellegrino. You may know him from The Tomorrow People, where he played Jedediah. You may know him from Supernatural, where he had a great role in that show, as well as other things like Lost and Dexter and all sorts of great roles. And he is the lead on an A&E drama. It's getting ready to break on March the 9th. It is a supernatural suspense show where folks are rising from the dead, and it's a very interesting show based on a very popular and famous French series, and we're looking forward to it and hope to send you the links there to A&E so you can check the trailer out. You can find out more about it. Make sure you don't miss it. And Mark, when because you've moved really from a lot of these sort of supernatural sci-fi influential shows and that kind of thing. What about Jack and the show is very unique for you?
Well, I've tried to make some of the figures that I've played that most people would consider kind of archetypal. I've tried to make those characters every man, as opposed to going to the archetypal, and I think Jack is every man. I mean, it's not something that I have to kind of place into the character or input into the character, it's written that way. I like his flaws. I like the way he deals or doesn't deal with his grief, and that becomes a major problem, a human problem that he has to overcome through the course of the show, and may be able to or may not. And I like exploring those human issues that, are just right down to earth, that everybody has to deal with: grief and the hereafter, and what miracles mean. I mean, these are things that I think everybody thinks about, and trying to recompose a family that's completely fallen apart, and all the things that everybody goes through. So it's actually nice to be in a problem that's worldly as opposed to apocalyptic in nature.
Yeah.
Although this might have some suggestions of that at some point.
Well, you get to reunite with Carlton, who you work with Lost, and is his approach very similar, or how much has he changed over the years, especially with some of the other things that he's been working on?
I mean, he's the same Carlton that I knew back when we were doing Lost. He's always just a dynamic guy, and he's always very interested in story and how to make the most truthful and interesting story. And so he's always been a guy that thinks outside the box. So thank God that hasn't changed at all. And I love his process. His process is very much about, how do we get the best scene possible, and how do we get the most humanity out of every actor, and how do we speak each actor's language? And he's very open to that kind of creative process.
March the 9th is called The Return. It starts on A&E. It's a great drama, and as you guys know, Bates Motel has found a great success, and they're on A&E, so we'd expect that Carl's relationship with the network, they've tapped into something, they've seen something very special about the series, and you don't want to miss that. And we're talking to Mark Pellegrino about the show and about the role. And he alluded a little bit to Lost and how it wrapped up, and I know when we talked to Titus Welliver and a couple of the other alum from that show, there's a lot of back and forth. And Mark, do you still get hounded pretty regularly about the finale of Lost and what it meant, or certain aspects of the show and what it means?
Oh, sure. The end is particularly troubling to a lot of people. And, I feel like, I thought it was kind of perfect, to be honest with you. I felt like it didn't have to wrap everything up, and maybe shouldn't have wrapped everything up. And the fact that it didn't is kind of great in that you never stop relating to it. You always have this relationship with the piece that's evolving, and it becomes yours. I mean, Lost, maybe it doesn't have an overall objective interpretation. Maybe your Lost is different from my Lost, and that's just fine.
That's a fascinating way to look at it, I suppose, and definitely as a legacy in television history that definitely cannot be ignored or discounted. And it's going to be interesting, especially now with the Netflix generation. Every so often you're going to have these 10-year spurts where now another generation has discovered Lost, and they're binge watching your work there as Jacob and reacting accordingly. And that's got to be a pretty exciting part of your resume and legacy as an actor.
Oh, it is. It's nice to be able to know that something that you've put out there is going to be affecting people long after you're gone. And in a way, that's, speaking of The Return, that's our kind of way of achieving immortality. And in some way we entertain and influence and really connect with people, far beyond our own ability in this moment to do it. It's pretty amazing to be a part of that.
You got a lot of other great shows I'd like to get to, and Tomorrow People was a really great show, and Jedediah is a very unique character. I enjoyed that a lot. Kind of an extension, a little bit of what you were trying to touch on a little bit earlier with the archetypes. And
mm-hmm.
when you come away as each of these different characters, how do you change? How does it sort of help you grow? Because there's a certain parallel to many of the characters, yet in obviously many ways they're not the same. But so how do you as an actor when you begin, and then how you come out the other side? How does Mark Pellegrino change?
I think these characters can inform you about life, and like I feel like Lost helped me to understand something about the nature of forgiveness. And kind of community, and how we all kind of help one another along our paths, and doing complex characters kind of helps me understand facets of, life and my own personality. Lucifer is kind of an iconic character that, humanizing him in a way, even if I'm committing a mortal sin by doing that, was kind of profound for me, because it helped me to analyze his myth from the point of view that I don't think most people analyze it from, and it made me have a different perspective on him, that not as the Prince of Darkness or evil, but as someone who has a kind of ultimate vision of justice. And when you look at the myth in those terms, it definitely changes around the relationships of good and bad for you, kind of forever. When you see what a person's fighting for from their point of view, it gives you, I think, a wider scope and a much more inclusive way of looking at all people.
And I don't mean to sound like I'm going to fence you into an awkward place. That is not my intention here. But with shows like Lost and Supernatural, and they deal with some very challenging topics, which I think is just so fabulous to create the conversation on spirituality or even a person's faith. How much of that has actually impacted you? I mean, have you sort of, like, because of the reevaluation that you kind of even mentioned, has it really changed you a little bit in how you view your own personal faith or spirituality?
Well, I've always wrestled with that, because I grew up exposed to Christian ethics and Christian mythology, more or less, and was very immersed in it, in that time of life when you're deciding what philosophy is going to dictate your values, in my 15, 16 years of age. And I've wrestled with it because I got exposed to rational philosophy sometime in my 20s, and have always gone back and forth between a kind of concession that there's a spiritual realm and then absolute denial and atheism. And I can't say that even spiritually oriented shows like Lost or Supernatural have changed that. It's definitely changed my point of view about certain myths and about dynamics between people, but more or less, I feel like my wrestling and battle has kind of been my own, and over the years, I've fallen on the side of rational philosophy.
Fascinating.
More and more away from spirituality or mysticism, some other means of knowledge besides your mind and your senses. So I've kind of gone further and further and unapologetically and publicly, by the way, away from it.
It is definitely fascinating. The show touches on those things, and I do enjoy bringing that up to the cast and creators as well. I appreciate you sharing that. And let's move a little bit to a very dynamic character, and definitely on a different side of that, and that was definitely Bishop and Being Human, and a show that we really enjoyed, and really wished for more from your character. I really kind of enjoyed the villain role, and I know they kept bringing in other villains and that kind of thing, and he kind of gets in the backdrop and that kind of thing. And what was the fan reaction on that journey? Because that show seemed like, obviously there's a huge UK following, and then of course having the American version, I got off to this incredible start. So what was that journey like definitely from a fan standpoint?
Well, I think a lot of people accepted the show right off the bat. There didn't seem to be a lot of that schism that there can be in the fan base, where people are so into the British show that they can't even stand watching the American show, and vice versa. There was a kind of people kind of understood that the British show was a jumping off point, and our version was our own version, and it had its own style. And it had its own dynamic between the characters and storylines and all that. And I think they were very, very supportive. And I think what really helped that was the dynamic between the cast members, because I don't think I've ever worked on a show where everybody was so close-knit. I mean, I really felt like they were my family. I'm friends with them today, to this day. Sam Witwer and I are really good friends, and we're gaming buddies, and we kind of share a lot of values with each other. So I think that connection between characters is something that is really rare, and like you see it in Supernatural between Jared and Jensen, it just comes off, and I think people respond to that. and the fans responded to that in spades, I think. But Bishop, I loved Bishop. I wanted more Bishop because I thought he was such a sympathetic character. From my point of view, maybe that's because I always try to have sympathy for my characters, but I felt like he really tried to do the right thing and really tried to heal old wounds between he and Sam, and really loved him as a son, because that was, to me, the real love story of season 1 was between Bishop and Aiden, but it was unrequited, and that's what made his story so sympathetic to me.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that, and really enjoyed the character and the dynamics thereof. And when you experience stuff like that, and then of course Lost and some of the others, what has, or speak to rather, I guess that's the best way to ask it, is the Comic-Con experience that surrounds shows like this. Is the fandom still just blows your mind when you experience these kinds of things?
Oh yeah. I go to several conventions a year. Some of them are signing conventions, and some of them are events specifically for Supernatural. And the fan base for Supernatural, particularly, sci-fi fan base is very passionate, and smart, just as it is. But the Supernatural fan base has become a family of 5 million or however many it is, and they're really, really, really passionate, really supportive, not just about the show, but about a lot of dynamics in your life, with the accessibility of us to between the actors and the fan base because of social media. It's like they're right here with you, and we experience life in a lot of ways together, and it's pretty amazing. And I love that experience, going to the fan conventions and interacting with fans and talking to them about everyday things, not just about the show, but I'm kind of into that. Let's really talk to each other. Let's not entertain one another. Let's talk and get to know one another, and I get to do that at these fan conventions. It's pretty great.
And it is pretty great. We're talking again to Mark Pellegrino about some of the different shows from his great resume of work. He's going to be seeing the new A&E drama called The Returned, which debuts March the 10th with a brand new 10-episode season right to A&E. So look forward to that, and just tons of great work. And I would like to run through some of the shows and maybe mention an actor or two and just kind of get your thoughts on them, even if it's just like these one word or one phrases that kind of help, summarize some of your experiences there. And first, let me go to, just a great cult favorite. I don't know. I think Dexter is going to kind of be like Lost because it was just such a brilliant concept. And then it was just so amazingly done season after season after season. And again, Netflix and some of the other on-demand products will probably keep introducing it to another generation after another. Speak to a little bit your experience on the show, and of course, again, the fan base and the legacy that is Dexter.
Yeah, that definitely blew up. It was, I think it was one of my first, arc type characters that I got to play, where I had a long storyline and a character that, you get to know for a while and went from one place to another in over the course of several episodes, as opposed to just one. So I got to feel like I was a part of a crew and a family like I'd never done before. So it was really intimate to me. And it's funny because Michael C. Hall and I had such an antagonistic relationship as characters on the show that for about a week or two into my run there, it kind of bled over into our kind of off-camera dynamic. Not like that we snapped at each other or looked at each other suspiciously. We just never kind of spoke to each other because our on-camera scenes were so hostile. And then one day by accident, we both found ourselves at craft service, and I looked at him and he looked at me, and I said, "I thought you didn't like me." And he said, "I thought you didn't like me." And then we just started talking and broke the ice. It was kind of the only time in the history of my work that the on-camera stuff actually affected the off-camera stuff for a while. But he was a great guy and such a fine actor, and a real privilege to work with somebody like that. Who's smart, who's intelligent and intuitive when they work. And Julie was really, really fun, even though our scenes were almost never fun. But she's so deeply emotional and affected by everything, very sensitive, and I really loved working with her too. It was a great show, and it was fun to be in kind of the the opening of that show to the world. It was a real privilege to be a part of that.
Great show. Let's go to one that I was incredibly saddened by to see it end so quickly. I think the network, I'm not putting Mark on the spot, so I don't have your people call me. Call him, then call me. I think Revolution was moved to the wrong night. They messed with it too much. They never knew when it was going to be on, whatever, and it ended up getting killed. Working with Billy Burke and playing Jeremy on a show that, kind of a great, unique idea. I think Abrams had some great concepts, and then, of course, they kind of muddled around with it schedule-wise and that kind of thing. Speak a little bit to your experience in that show.
Yeah, and Eric Kripke too. I mean, Eric Kripke, the creator of Supernatural, was the main guy on that, and I love him. He's just a great guy and a great creative force. And Billy is a really cool, down to earth guy. He's just such a simple, down to earth dude, and I think that part kind of really benefited from his simple kind of honesty, and. Yeah, and that show was interesting in a lot of ways, just because I felt, from my own perspective of it, I felt kind of on the outside, as great as Tracy and Billy and everybody are. I felt as a character, like my character kind of felt like they had built a kind of path between me and the Monroe character, and I expected something to happen between the two of us that was different. So I was definitely shocked at the way they decided Jeremy needed to go. And I thought he was going to be a different character, play a different part in Monroe's growing paranoia and megalomania, and I was hoping he'd be a foil to that. But so for me, it was a little bit like I didn't quite know where I stood within the story itself. And and it was, and for me, it was like the show was just kind of getting up on its feet, and it's kind of disorganized, and so it all contributed to a sense of me kind of being on the peripheral of things, as opposed to kind of in the mix and in the fight. But I do know that what happened to them kind of happened to the Tomorrow people, where they switch nights, and then the audience doesn't carry over, and nobody kind of knows where you are, and you get lost in this netherworld of, this purgatory of show where you're kind of in between states, and eventually you just fall off.
Yeah, and it definitely Revolution. I mean, I know it happened to Tomorrow people as well. I definitely agree with that as well, but definitely Revolution, because I know a ton of people who just love the show. That was like, what night is it even on? And you tune in, it's not there, and people really were complaining. Even on this show, they actually even complained. We were talking with some people about that. But you made your rounds on a lot of other shows, CSI, The Closer. Let me ask about one particular thing. Is Jim Caviezel this serious on Person of Interest? Is he pretty much like this all the time? Is he just this kind of serious guy?
He is one of the sweetest, most humble people I've ever met. Like, he's so humble that when you're talking to him, it's almost like he doesn't know what to say. And it's very endearing. To me, he's like an actor who's not about words. He's about, he's in his body. He's an athlete, for real. He's a real athlete, and he is kind of that character in that he's from the body and from the gut, and 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 that's the way he communicates, kind of just, simply and honestly. It's almost it's sweet, like a big kid. And I really loved him for that, because I thought he was just so great. We bonded on a lot of levels, he and I, because we're both physical guys. So we got to talk a lot about mixed martial arts and the stuff that I kind of really dig, and he's into as well.
It's always funny whenever I send my people out, do research for me, help me make sure I button things up to at least not embarrass myself during an interview like this. And this one's a little bit easier for me since I followed most of your work, and many of your characters have stood out to me personally. And the one thing that they noted was, IMDb wants to recognize your work on Big Lebowski. And I'm like, what? Big Lebowski? I don't know who to call over at IMDb to create a shuffle, but do you even is there like a great story or a take home from your Big Lebowski days? I mean, are there still people like tracking you down going, I love you in Big Lebowski? I mean, that seemed like an odd choice for me out of the great work that you've done.
Yeah, people do always, like, where's the money, Lebowski? Shout that at me.
Yeah, that's true.
They're very passionate about that. And who knew when we were making it that it was going to become this kind of iconic cult film? But every character, I think, in that story is really defined and really clear and really, really interesting. So from the smallest character on, I mean, I didn't even have a name in that. I was called the Blonde Man. The rug pisser had a name, Woo, and so that such a minor character who's only in a couple of scenes could impact people like that is great. I mean, it just shows how talented the Coen brothers are. But I don't have any like funny stories or anything about the Big Lebowski. For me, it was like going to school and watching the Coen brothers work and watching the way Jeff Bridges worked, because at the time I thought he was kind of an unheralded genius, you know, even though he'd been nominated before. I thought he was just kind of underrated and great. You know, people knew he was great, but, you know, it's one of those vibes where I just felt like I was watching somebody who's in such command of his technique and his instrument that it was like going to school every day for me.
Let me just name drop a few, and you can just speak to them if you would, and if you don't, that's fine. I totally understand. Let's go around. Let's go back around. Titus Welliver.
I love him. We became like brothers, real brothers on the show. And one of my favorite things is going to P.F. Chang's with him practically every night, drinking wine and listening to him tell stories as Al Pacino or Christopher Walken. Does the best imitations, tells the best stories I've ever heard.
They're incredible. Absolutely. I could only get a little bit out of him whenever I interviewed him. I told him, so I'm going to keep chasing after you until I can get like the intro. You know, you're listening to the Dispatch Radio as Walken or Pacino. So I told him I'm not ever letting you off the hook.
Yeah, and you can even say which Pacino. You want early Pacino, you want late Pacino.
Right.
You can do it all.
Yeah, whatever he is in the mood for, I would take. So, you know, you worked on a film, and I won't forget this. I'm gonna date myself, but hey, listen, it is what it is. Drowning Mona, you worked with DeVito, Neve Campbell, and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
What?
I think I mean, DeVito could be a mob boss. I mean, he's so powerful. You know, we remember him mostly from comedies, but he's just so powerful and so charismatic. And there's a reason why he's, you know, does all the things that he does. And Neve was great, was funny. Everybody were, you know, doing this crazy comedy. And I mean, the most outgoing of them all, of course, is Jamie Lee Curtis. She's very alpha girl and very fun, and her husband's Christopher Guest, so she's got a great sense of timing and comedy, and yeah, I dug her. But that whole project was really fun to work on. I was in an interesting time of my life, and I was doing two movies at the same time, and working on one till 2 a.m. and waking up at 6 a.m. to do the other one.
Just comatose, just wheeling him out there to keep him working and paying the bills.
Yep.
You got to work with Sam Jack on Twisted?
I did.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I had that scene with him. he's. I mean, I didn't really talk to Sam too much, unfortunately. My big hero for that show, believe it or not, was the director Philip Kaufman, who did The Right Stuff and Quills, and I was friends with Ashley because Ashley Judd went to our theater company and studied there. We both studied under the same teacher. So Sam was very courteous and cool, but we didn't really talk too much in between takes.
Great stuff and great shows, Mark Pellegrino. And the last thing I want to close with is, you know, whenever you look at his resume, and I circled this myself, so I wasn't gonna. My people didn't do it, but I said, you know, it's such a long road for you that your first couple of roles, you know, were quote the punk on an LA Law episode and the quote dude on a Doogie Howser episode. What do you say? I know I'm going old school, bro.
I remember those, boy.
What do you say to the folks that are, you know, maybe they're cutting their teeth with a few extra gigs, they're doing one-offs, who knows? What do you say to the folks, you know, just trying to, you know, bump and grind their way through a career and that kind of thing, looking back when you're in these sort of pseudo unnamed roles and now you know, get a great opportunity now with A&E?
Yeah, you have to be patient, man. I mean, the business is full of very talented people that don't have the thick skin and the endurance to stay in the race for very long. My mentor, Sandy Meisner, was asked by someone who his best students were. Was it Gregory Peck? Was it John Voight? Was it Robert Duvall? Was it Maureen Stapleton? He said, no, my best students never made it. Because there's a dynamic quality, like host of qualities that go into, being able to stay in the mix for as long as it takes to get where you want to go. So, endure, be patient with yourself overall, and remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So take your time and know that eventually you'll grow into yourself.
It's a great word of advice, an amazing legacy of work, in my opinion. I love this kind of stuff, and it was great to get a chance to talk with him. The show is called The Return. Check it out on A&E. We'll link to a lot of that stuff, get you hooked up there on Facebook, Twitter, and all their public social media stuff. Make sure you turn out and support that show. Mark, my friend, I thank you so much for your time. I really have enjoyed this. Maybe we get a chance to talk again when Return is up for a season 2, right?
Me too. I'd love to. I'd love to come back and talk about season 2 any day.
Any day. That sounds great. Thanks again for your time, my brother, and hope to talk to you soon.
You got it. Talk to you later. Thanks.